Testing. All right, welcome again to another YouTube Live session. Today's topic's unusual. It's the end of web design. I.e., don't design for the web, design for the mind. This will be different than anything we've taught in the past. You'll see some overlap and you'll also see a lot of new content. We've been rethinking the role of the website and how to approach it in the future, and we're going to get right into the session with a way for you to limber up your optimization capabilities. Take a look at this page and tell yourself, delegate to yourself a task here. What would you do? What's the most important changes you would make to drive up the response rate for this page? And I'm watching you. Use the chat feature and start putting in your suggestions. As you're doing that, I'm going to tell you a bit of the story behind the page. I was sitting in my office when I received a phone call from the CEO of a company, and he was deeply concerned. The page you're looking at was the launch of a new site. He hired a conversion expert from California who has written books on the subject, etc. Working with the conversion expert, he redesigned the site and he launched it. Problem was, revenue dropped 46%. This is a small business, and I'm using it on purpose today. We'll look at some big brands later. But revenue dropped 46%, and he needed to quickly somehow get his conversion rate back. So you're looking at the new page, which cost the 46% drop. And I'll suggest to you also that we went in and rolled back to the original design, and then we created a treatment. But I'm looking at the comments first. Somebody said, get it out of the 90s. Where is the opt-in? It looks like Core Health, Darian said that. What to learn, then buy. Where to look, says Ann. Good point, Ann. Anybody else see something that you would do to improve this page? While you're thinking about that, I'm going to share with you sort of the full view of it up and down. You get a sense of it. And then I'm going to shift over to a treatment. Michael said it needs a better flow. Dave said it looks like a spammy site. Way too many distractions, all right? So it's interesting to hear your feedback. Here is the new page. Before I show that, this is the actual whole cart checkout. There's the page and the checkout steps, all right? Now here's the page we designed. Notice the change of the headline. Steel Seal repairs blown head gaskets in just 1 hour. Now, I'll share with you the results of this, but can you see some of your suggestions have already been taken, and I'll scroll this page up and down so you can see it. So what happened? And how does that connect to what we're doing today? Well, I can tell you this, the new page not only got them from the, above the zero because they had dropped 46%, but it added 54% to the revenue. 54%, and this is across the entire business. And I want to point out for you that because this is sort of a one type of product, limited SKU e-commerce offering, this was 54% more money directly added to their bottom line. And if you can imagine, you didn't have to spend more on marketing, so CPA goes down, revenue goes up, and ultimately, so does margin, because your cost to sell is lower. Now, the point of this story is not to point out to you that we have clever scientists here. The point is that there is a whole new way to think about your web design. And the goal of this session will not simply be to drill down on little changes to your conversion rate. We will give you resources for that, but I want to take you on a journey with me today. And it's a very different kind of a journey as we rethink what the role of a website is and sort of shift our paradigm. There's 4 key principles we need to understand, and as we understand those principles, we'll be able to apply them and use them when we think about redesigning our site, or even if we're designing a few pages. Now, if you're with a large brand, we've done this with a $250 million build, and across a revenue stream that was over $100 billion. So this works for a large site. If you're an entrepreneur with a small business, the example I shared with you at the top of this session will show you how this can apply also to you as a small business. Now, I'm going to take you to the first point. Don't think web, think mind. It's going to require a lot of work from you and I together at a high pace to get through the density of what we have in front of us. So I'm going to drop right into the first subpoint, which is this. It is not a website. Everything about that metaphor creates a danger for us. It creates a danger because we think of it as a place, and it's not a place. It's a process, flowing and fluid. We think of it as a site, but it's not a site. It's zeros and ones. It's illusions triggering cues in the mind. It's really just pixels on a screen. Thank you, Paul. It's really just pixels on a screen. So ask yourself a question. If it's not a website, then what does it exist for, and how do I utilize it in a way that's closer to the reality of my funnel and my expectations? Well, the next thing you need to understand is that you start with who before you start with how. How many times I've looked at a website project getting ready to go into play, and they have not adequately began with the most important point that you design the entire experience around, and that is the who. So the first point, the first critical piece is that it's not a website, it's a fluid conversation, and it should feel like a dialogue. Secondly, you need to think of it beginning with the who long before you get to the how. The how is, how do I drive more conversion rates? How do I get more revenue? Next, determine the what, then power it with the why. What am I trying to say here? I'm going to show you with a real example and the treatment in just a moment. But focus on this. The what has no power until you give it a why. The why tells me why I should do what you're saying. But if I don't understand the why doesn't matter. And many of these websites are not clear on the what, and so there's no point in even getting to why. So start with who, not how. Determine the what, then power it with a why. And finally, trace the what back to its constituent yes sequence. Now, just take a moment. How many of you on here have done a web redesign in the last 12 months, or you're getting ready to do one in the next 12 months? Just raise your hand using the chat feature. I want to get a sense of you as you're thinking about that. And if you're on here saying, well, I'm not redoing my website, if you're getting ready to even redo a path or a few key pages, then the point of this will still connect closely to what you need to accomplish. And I see Ann Ashley says they're getting ready, or they've done something. Ellen says yes. Just keep giving me the feedback so I can sort of steer this conversation where it produces the most value for you. So, having said those four keys, the fourth one is a little confusing. So, it says trace the what back to its constituent yes sequence. Whatever you want me to do ultimately requires a macro yes. It's the yes to becoming a customer. But there's a whole series of micro yeses prior to that. So look at Steel Seal, and we're looking at the control, and we're looking at the treatment. And you'll notice how the treatment, let's drill down on it for a moment. It helps me understand very clearly the answer to three questions. Am I in the right place? Now, you may think that's obvious, but it isn't obvious. You can't even tell by the name you're in the right place. The reality is, I'm here because I have a problem. I want to solve a blown head gasket. And so the first thing we do is we shift from this sort of tentative dialogue, simple fix for blown head gaskets. That's not even a complete sentence. It doesn't have a complete thought. It's like a big title, and it doesn't communicate with enough modifiers to give it power. Steel Seal repairs blown head gaskets in just 1 hour. Can you see the difference? So at this page, understand the very first and most important thing you've got to do for every website is determine what is your objective. So frequently, we have competing objectives, and our homepage becomes a real estate turf war, and everybody's trying to get a piece, and everybody has an objective, and so we have this convoluted, messy series of conversations all starting at the same time, and the customer has to navigate through this confusing morass. Now, I share that with you to say that every time I sit down with a company and ask him, what is the objective? It feels like almost every time I get an ambiguous answer, or I get a disagreement, or I get an argument. Figure out who. Figure out the what. The what it is, the behavior you want them to take. Figure out the why they should take it. then make certain that on this site and everything about it supports that thesis. Now, for those of you who are new, I'm going to just share this with you for a brief moment, but I'm going to move on. And again, many of you who have been exposed to our content for many years, a lot of new things will unfold as I continue to teach. But for the rest, I want to catch up with this. Do not think of it as a site. Think of it as a thought sequence. And understand that this funnel illustration from my book helps to sort of explain what's really going on. First of all, to understand your task, you need to do something a little bit profound with the funnel itself. People don't buy from websites. People buy from people. And the funnel, the way it's often presented to us in school, it sounds like people are falling into it and traveling down the middle. People are not. To even think about your task as a marketer, you've got to invert the funnel because people are falling out of the funnel. And they don't travel up the middle. They climb up the sides. These are paths, one micro yes at a time. So when you're designing a website, what you're really doing is designing a sequence of thought with key decision junctures, tiny junctures. For instance, a headline. The headline has two goals: to capture attention and convert it to interest. That requires 2 micro yeses just to get through a headline. And so you don't start by talking to your creative, doing a briefing, getting with your agency, doing a design. It's not a site. It's not the web. You are creating a series of cues to steer a fluid conversation towards an inevitable conclusion. And you do that by controlling and optimizing for every small micro yes in the process. Is that making sense to you so far? All right. Now, as you're thinking about that, I've got to move to the next piece. I hear about these launches all the time. Don't launch a website. You say, what do you mean? Well, you should have a calibration period, and you should control expectations with your bosses when you launch that site, that you are going to iterate into the highest performing conversion vehicle within the first 45 days of your launch. And I'm going to explain to you how you do that. What you don't want is that illustration that I just gave you of this man who launched a site and conversion dropped 46%. Unless you think that doesn't happen with big companies. I was lecturing in San Francisco, got an emergency call from a Fortune 10 company. That's a huge organization. They launched a new site and conversion had dropped 74%. And it was a full crisis. I had to leave the conference, have somebody else speak. I got on a plane and flew out there, set up a war room and went to work on correcting the problem. So this is a problem that we don't have to experience. We don't have to take this risk. I'll tell you something else. When you're getting ready to get the launch correct, don't depend on focus groups. Focus groups make it easy for people to do what often turns out to be pseudo-research. Listen to me. Nobody flies a 747 because they get a focus group together and says, what do you know? Do you think this will fly? Would you get in it? How much would you pay to sit in this plane? And ask a group of people in a focus group what they think about the plane. That's not how we launch 747s, and it's not how we should launch websites. So keep going with me as I talk about this calibration period. This is one of the key ways to totally reduce your risk. So the first thing that you must do, and just follow this piece, is don't launch in hope, but pre-test the critical paths. Now, what is your critical path? Well, if you're a lead gen site, it may be your downloads or your contact us forms with a key offer page or key landing page or key product description page. You need to know what that path is and pre-test it prior to the launch with optimized messaging and thus reducing the risk that when you launch, conversion will go down. If you're an e-commerce site, it's typically the category page, homepage, category page, and the product page, and then the cart. Understanding that path and pre-testing key elements is a critical way to getting your design into a huge win right at launch. Something else you need to consider, and by the way, it's subscription path, you know what that is, the same thing. Those are critical paths and they must be pre-tested. But it's not enough. It's not enough. Sometimes you don't have sufficient traffic or sometimes you don't have time to test everything. When we go to a company and ask them to design a website, they think they're creating a thing, a piece of creative. And the job of the website, through the mind of the designer so often, is to impress somebody. But a website's job is not to impress people, it's to create an impression, completely different. You're not trying to impress them with your artistic abilities or your aesthetic skills. You're trying to create an impression in their mind that will help you to foster a conclusion that will lead to a decision that will lead to the behavior that you're trying to target. So don't bet on one hypothesis. Critical pages, you should have 2 or 3 versions of those pages. Not every page in the site, but a key subscription form, for instance. You might have 3 different approaches, and the day you go into the calibration period, you quickly iterate into which one of those 3 produces the most upside. Does that make sense for you? All right, so let me take you to a third piece. Don't let dominant opinions drive design. Give customers the power to refine your launch. Every time we do this, we get in a room and somebody who's either the most paid person or the most vociferous, but they push their way through and we end up with a page that's a social dynamic driving it as opposed to a scientific dynamic. Or worse, we all want to play nice. And so we work together and compromise down to something we can all agree on, which means the page gets watered down, diluted, and again underproduces. Web pages represent an opinion. And if you take the opinion and turn it into a hypothesis, you can scientifically refine it and drive a strategic result that'll make a huge difference. So, I'm going to continue. I've got a bit of a cold, and so forgive me if I pause just a moment now and then, but I'm going to keep rolling through the critical contents that I can help you. So let's back up for a second. We've said don't think web, think mind. And we've said don't think launch, think calibrate. And we've suggested to you that before the official launch, you go live, and I don't mean just a soft launch, because that's about usability. I'm talking about 45 days of traffic pouring through your site, correcting the site with the alternate versions of the pages that you have, plus new critical paths pre-tested. When you do all that, it'll drive the result. Let me keep going. Here's an example from 2 sites. You can take a look at this. And what we had to do was pre-test the messaging of the value proposition. Don't think rebrand, think value proposition. It's far more important than just a brand. Sometimes rebranding it's an exercise in futility. Painting a house with bad plumbing is just a painted house with bad plumbing. You still have the same issues. And what you really need to get right for a new launch is the value proposition. It is the compass of your new design. If you look at these 2 side by side, you're going to see it's 321%. By the way, I keep looking to the left, if you're wondering why, because that's where I have all of my all the chat features, and I'm reading your chat comments and addressing them and addressing your questions. So I keep turning to the left-hand side, and my camera team and my technical guys are all getting on me for it. All right, but look at the difference in the increase in revenue by thinking this through and pre-testing prior to the launch. 321%. Here's another example. This is Aetna. And look at the difference again. Here's 2 versions of it. By the way, they're moving the whole giant monitor. This is a big studio I'm in, and I'm surrounded by monitors. It's quite intimidating. Cliff just came in and moved it. He's my friend. He's been with me we've been working together for almost 40 years now. And I'm just glad he can take his feeble back in here and move something around. All right, look at the Aetna example. Again, we pre-tested this, and the increase, and this was in leads flowing into the call center, is 638%. So let's keep learning. You may be thinking, I'm looking for something tangible I can do right now. I want to shift your thinking about how to do a design, but in the end, I'm going to give you some very concrete, practical things, and also we're going to send you resources where you can see some quick moves that will help you. Let's go to the third point. Do not think technology, think humanity. Now, we are really missing it here. The point of technology is not to be more productive. We use technology so we can become more productive. We can accomplish less. We can mail more people. But as we do that, we fail to use technology to harness a more organic, natural, real relationship. The point of technology as you're thinking through your tech stack when you're designing a website is not all the savings and all the things you can do. It's about enabling more personal, more specific communication. Let me continue. If you don't give your website a voice, your prospect will, and it probably won't be the right one. I see website, I'm going to show you some examples in just a moment, after website that has no conversation. They establish no dialogue. They do not talk to you, they talk at you. And that fails to accomplish the primary objective of that site. Here's another point. Think vertical, not horizontal. This is a flowing dialogue, not a barrage of competing claims. And when you lay your pages out horizontally, you lay them out in a way that it's difficult for people to follow and understand. It needs to flow like the mind, vertically. Let's look at an example. All right, take a look at this page. Somebody tell me what's wrong with it. It's up right now on your screen. We're doing good for time. Tia, it's good to have you on this call. There you go. How would you make this page more human is the question. But what's wrong with it? Based on what we've said, if you were redesigning this site, what do you see that's wrong? Dave Fogel says means nothing. It needs to flow like the mind in a vertical flow. That's correct. It tells me nothing, says Michael. It's not immediately clear what they're providing. That's correct, Emily. Another person, I don't know what this is about. And no info. And where am I? Somebody said. Exactly. I don't even know what the picture is, somebody said. Now look, folks, the web is full of this. Let's just talk about this page for a quick moment. First of all, it has a title, Adaptability. Then it has a slogan. It's the new look of partnership. Now ask yourself a question. Is there any meaning being made here? No. What is the goal of this headline? It is to get me into the dialogue below. It has to do two things to get me into the dialogue. It has to capture my attention, and adaptability does not. Convert it to interest. And it's the new look of a partnership, does not. And then underneath it is a meaningless button, learn more. Learn more about what? I don't even know what the subject is. So the problem with this page is not only does the headline fail to engage me in the dialogue, but guess what? There is no dialogue. There's just boxes and words. There's no conversation. And you're leaving me to make meaning myself, and that is dangerous. So this is an example of a page that doesn't understand its task. The people who designed this were thinking website. They were not thinking sequence of thought. They were thinking page. They were not thinking mental cues. They were thinking data, not thinking behavioral traces. Data is nothing more than behavioral traces, and you use those traces to see patterns and predict outcomes in the future. So let's look at another example. Somebody take this page. Now, this is critical. The point of all this is we've got to use the technology of the web to create more personal relationships, not less personal relationships. And sites like this just are there in your face, talking at you, but never talking to you. And that's a huge danger. And candidly, a third of my audience are agencies. So agencies, I'm on your side. But many agencies don't get this. You do not create a website to impress people. You create a website to drive an impression, foster a conclusion that leads to the right decision, that leads to the desired behavior. And the spear point of all marketing is conversion. And if you have a spear with no point, you have dysfunctionality. And in a site like this, for instance, the point isn't clear. Let's go to Anchor. Talk to me about it. What would you do to make it better? No value prop, somebody said. No dialogue, somebody said. My clients all seem to want this design. They think it's alluring. Leah, that's a great point. There's two types of needs, the ones we know we have and the ones we don't know we have. One of the keys sometimes to helping clients is you've got to address their need, but you need to show them in the way you address it that what they really need is perhaps different than they first understand. That's really true in a service business because they're turning to you for expertise, and often it means they don't have that expertise, and so it becomes quite tricky. Somebody says, I'm not sure what they do. What's in it for me? Emily says, how will this flexible metal hose improve my life? All right, so here's another example. What do you think about that headline? Flexible metal hose. There's an issue there, obviously. We don't know what this is, why it's important, and I go straight from there to shop now. So I don't think there's a lot of time to spend on this page. It's doing it all wrong. And understanding that can help us think about what we're going to do to create a dialogue. Does your headline have a header and a subheader? Does it talk to me? Does it use complete thoughts or sentences? Does it drive me into a sensible dialogue below? Having traveled through 4 inches of your website, do I know if I'm in the right place? Do I know what I can do here? And do I know why I should do it? Let's keep going. So here's one more point. Don't think cost, think gain. Here's the most fun part. I have been in situation after situation where I sat down across from somebody and I said, well, you need to fix your value prop. But we can do a quick win, find low-hanging fruit, drive serious revenue, and reinvest that back in solving the value prop piece. I had that conversation years ago with the Boston Globe. They had launched Boston.com and BostonGlobe.com. People didn't know the difference. One was cost money and the other did not. Their value proposition was wrong and they were losing a lot of money and fast. What we did was a quick win intensive where we focused heavily on where the low-hanging fruit was for them and then made them a few $1 million that year. And if you look, these are 3 slides from their deck, not ours, where they were lecturing on what happened. And you can see, if you look first of all at the curve on the bottom right, you'll see how it went down and then it began to rise. That rise up began the moment we turned on the new paths. We then took the money we made that year, which was an extra few $1 million, even on a declining revenue stream, and they tell you all that. There's a video, you can watch it. And we reinvested it in understanding what the new value proposition should be. They've been very successful since then. They've raised prices 74%. So getting that piece right is critical. Now, is Steve on the phone? Steve Diebold, are you on here? You were here last week, and I don't know if you're here or not, but this was one of our students who's engaged with lots of our activity, and he had this site, and this was his control. And we worked with Steve to try and help him figure out where the low-hanging fruit is, but you take a look at this page. Audience, what would you do right now to improve this small, this is, a website where every dollar matters to its principal. What's the first thing you would do? Tell me. Oh, yeah, Paul Cheney's saying, tell people to like the video. Please like the video, all right? Apparently, we're studying right now the impacts of those likes on YouTube in particular, and so it'll be helpful. Somebody said, add a headline to this video. Somebody said it differentiate the bullets and cut them down. What else would you do? Give me one more major change that you would make to improve this site. All right. Lose all the clutter, reduce the clutter. All right, so let's take a look at the new page. Here's the new page. Now, this is really the product of a quick win where we settled with them on a process that we deployed to help figure out where are the critical changes. If you make these changes, this is the fastest route to cash. And then we built it out. And let's take a look at the two. Here's the difference. It's 18%. And frankly, I know the number is higher because Dave has contacted me afterwards, or Steve has, and shared with me, what's happened here. But this is a quote from Steve. There's an article on Marketing Sherpa about it. You can read about it. But the point again is this. You want to take that site and think of it in a new way if you're going to achieve a new level of results. Let's keep going. All right? So don't think cost, think gain. And let me explain the first thing. It's not about the expense to build a site. It's about the cash conversion cycle. How many know what a cash conversion cycle is? Tell me if you don't. Some of you probably, it's entrepreneurial words, it's startup capital words, it's accounting words. But the cash conversion cycle is critical when you're thinking about the project you may want to do with your site. Because if you leverage a quick win, you could probably pay for the entire site design. And the trick's going to be in the cash conversion cycle. And here's a slide that explains what it is. But the cash conversion cycle essentially is about how long it takes for you to make the money in your sales cycle. You invest, say, in the marketing, and you get a lead, and then you close them. Or if it's e-commerce, it's faster. But what is your closing cycle, and how long for you to generate that additional revenue from your inputs? Knowing that's just enough to explain my point. Once you know that, you'll know when you're going to make all your money back. And it's just a question of waiting until then, and you've made all that money or made all the extra money that you want to reinvest. And we sometimes use a spreadsheet tool. Do you have a copy of that, Paul? I've got an engineer beside me. We're going to pull up a spreadsheet that we use, and we can get you copies of this tool. But this tool typically takes all of your metrics and feeds them into a model that allows you to project what you can make with conversion increases of X or Y%. So if we increase the average order value, or the average lifetime value, or the current conversion rate. This is the monthly incremental revenue and the annual incremental revenue. So let's just take this model, give it a 30% conversion increase. Let's put in 18% like Steve got in the last illustration. So an 18% increase in this example would produce $691,000, $691,200 a year, correct? That's an 18% increase, and that's an additional $57,000 a month. Now let me ask you a question. Why would you just design a website when you couldn't go in here? If you're going to design a site and it's not converting higher, you shouldn't do the site anyway. And if it's going to convert higher and you figure that out in advance, you can pay for the entire site quickly simply by optimizing key paths. Now this isn't Papa Steve's numbers, by the way. This is just the model that we use. But my point for you is, if you think about your site, if you take a tool like this and you ask yourself, you can play with that conversion rate. Put it at 30%, Paul. So now we're going to give it a 30% conversion rate. And then take a look at average order value. Change that to, 30%, Paul, there we go. And then change the average order value to 150 because of a better value proposition. Change the average order, just the average order value up there. Good, boom. And let's see what that does. All right? So there's $144,000 a month in found money. Marketers, you should be working backwards from the ultimate yes, which produces a customer, to the micro yeses in the sequence of thought and all the way back into the channel with a model that shows how an increase here or here or here will drive, the financial rewards for you. And then you can dial in the revenue, pay for the entire site, pay for the tech stack. It is not hard to do. You just need to find a quick win. Paul, take me back to the deck. Can I get some feedback? I only have 18 minutes left. Am I going down the right track with you? Since I can't see you and I'm teaching something a little bit different, I'm watching your feedback coming in on the chat, and I'll adjust properly and try to optimize myself. When I teach speaking, I tell people that you don't optimize your presentation, you let your audience optimize you. So you guys optimize me, okay? Thanks. All right, so let's go to the third point. It's not about the total, it's about the ratio. That's that conversion-centric chart we just saw. And don't think in a single horizon, think in two horizons. Get a quick win for the near-term gain, but create competitive advantage for the long term. You don't want to do a quick win at the expense of the long term. So if you know the long-term strategy to gain serious competitive advantage, sustainable competitive advantage, then you can use the near term, 90 days, for instance, to produce all the money you need to completely redo your digital infrastructure. So that's a key. Think in two horizons. Now, let's take this, and I'm going to show you 3 ways to think right now. I have not taught this content to my knowledge online below, and each one of these could be their own session, but I'm going to start with what's called the ARC principle. If you haven't heard that before, you might want to take some notes, but understand how these 3 principles could help you right now find some of that money that's hiding in your website that will pay for its complete redesign. And I have a marker right here. So the first thing I have is ARC. ARC stands for a piece of simple philosophy. It's almost physics. There's only 3 things you can do to improve a site. So if you're looking at a page, in a moment I'm going to take you to a page and we're going to ask this, ARC, we're going to apply this to the page. All you can do is add. So I'll just write that going down. You can remove. Or, what's the third one, somebody? You can change. You can add, remove, or change. And that is all you do to drive the performance up for a site. And the typical way that I do this, in like a quick win, is I create the fulcrum. Think of this fulcrum that I'm drawing. On the side here is the perceived cost, and perceived is the key word, and the perceived value. Now, anytime perceived cost, that fulcrum weighs like this, anytime it's weighted down with higher perceived cost and perceived value, you've got a conversion problem. And when I'm trying to fix a page and right away discover, do I add, do I remove, or do I change, I start with the negative psychological elements. So friction and anxiety are on this side of the fulcrum, okay? Friction and anxiety. Over here is the value proposition and incentive. Now, what does that mean? If you get enough weight on the value side of the fulcrum, it'll tip back down and conversion will speed up again. But if you have too much weight in friction or anxiety, it will weight the perceived cost down and conversion will suffer. What you're trying to do, marketer, is reduce friction and anxiety using add, remove, or change, the ARC. That's the first place to find the hidden money on your page. It's harder to get your value proposition right. It's critical, it's essential, it's vital. But the easiest thing is to take those negative components and reduce their force. And you do that using the add, remove, change principle and applying it to the negative factors of the conversion sequence. If you're following me so far, I'm going to take you to the second key principle. So let's go back. And the second principle is optimize negative elements first. We discussed it, so I'll keep going. But use the ARC principle, then optimize the negative elements. And here they are. I just discussed them, but for those of you familiar with the conversion sequence, it's friction and anxiety. Find that on your page. We're going to do that together in just a moment. And then here comes a third principle, prioritize with M4L. Now these are common words in our lab. We use M4L all the time. You might wonder, what is that? Well, it's a critical principle that helps you figure out what to test first, second, and third. M4L stands for the most for the least. And the goal of any testing program, frankly, this is what makes a business work, is you're trying to achieve the most with the least. So let's apply that to testing. What test has the potential to get me a serious gain, but doesn't require a lot of dev or a lot of specialized design? That's how you start to think. Now start prioritizing in your head. Let's go back up here for a second. And so we have a page in front of us. I'm going to draw a page, and let's suppose this is a page that we're optimizing, and it's got content on it. The first thing we're going to try to do is apply the ARC principle. We're going to zero in on the negative elements, so I'm going to use a negative sign for that, and we're going to find M4L. Those three will help you find where there is money hiding in your current process that you could recover and pay for the whole website with. Does that make sense? If you're following this with me, I'm going to take you to an example, and we'll work on it together. And we're going to spend every moment up to 150 trying to help you capture this, use this, trying to make it practical for you. Okay? So let's go with these examples. Actually, where are they, Paul? I thought I had a couple of case studies lined up on the end here. Do you see them? All right. So we had them. All right. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to one of the pages that we had before. Here we go. Right here. All right. Let's look at the adaptability that you see in front of me.
They can also, if they want to chat us.
Yeah, feel free to chat a site for us to look at together, but I'm going to apply it on this page for just a second. Clearly there's no value, but what would you do first here? How would you apply ARC? Somebody tell me you would add, remove, or change. What would you add? Would you add, would you remove, or what would you change to reduce friction or anxiety? Somebody tell me. I'm looking as those numbers are coming in, and as you're writing, I'm going to give you one example. At the bottom, you have three types of investors, three equally weighted buttons. And one way that you might want to reduce friction is to remove the buttons or the equal emphasis of the buttons. So it's change or remove. All right? Somebody said change the headline. Yes. You say, well, is the headline creating friction? It is, because it's not doing its job to relieve the tension that is in me when I arrive at the site. And that tension is relieved as I gain story click or as I gain understanding. Remove, learn more, and change the headline and add the value proposition. So now we're adding not just the negative elements, but positive elements, and you're headed in the right direction. All right? Somebody tell me, so that's add, remove, or change, and then what you would want to do is test those things which enable you to get the most potential impact for the least amount. All right? And Philip Meese says invite the audience to segment themselves through a quiz, or better yet, separate them in the channel and send them to specialized sites if possible. And even if you want to appeal to all three. Is there one here that is predominant that you're trying to reach? You may want to make that button stronger. You got to understand the way traffic is behaving when they get to this site. Now, there's no humanity, there's no conversation, so you need to speak to the person. That will reduce psychological resistance, and it can reduce anxiety also. All right, you're thinking, well, now let's just go to this page. Somebody tell me, let's apply these three principles. ARC, what would you add, remove, or change to reduce friction or anxiety? Somebody tell me. I see Wendy. They have three audiences. Yes, Wendy, they do. But what percentage, are they equal in their value to the business? Somebody tell me what you do with Anchor. Can you see the slide? What's one thing you would do to reduce friction? All right. There's a good point. Look at the top. You'll see that we are on a sort of slideshow. It's 5 slides, reducing the number of those screens and making certain that that's not flipping around on people when they're trying to watch it. Add a command verb. Yes. Dave Fogel says, I just don't know what to do. Somebody said, remove the slider. Yes. All right. So those are all things that you could do that would reduce friction. And let's talk for just a moment. If you were trying to reduce anxiety, can you think of anything that you might do to reduce anxiety? Is there anxiety in the top 4 inches of the page? Tia says, direct my mind with a better headline, and that's an excellent point. But here's something to think about. Does the Shop Now button potentially create anxiety? What do you think? Tell me what your reason is. We have 8 minutes left. Add value prop before the Shop Now CTA, add pricing information. Here's why there's a potential anxiety. It's called implied anxiety with the Shop Now button, because I don't know enough to be comfortable shopping, and you're asking me to make too strong a commitment too soon in the process. I just got here. I don't know what you do. I don't know why I should do it with you, and I'm not ready to do something as serious as shop yet. So think about that. And by the way, if there is if this is all about products, they should probably have products on the page itself. All right, any other questions? Any questions before I go to the next piece I want to go with you? It's too early to ask me to shop now, Gary. That's correct. That's exactly the point. It's much too early. So, marketers, let's do one final key piece together in the last few moments. What I'd like to do is just help you understand what we're trying to accomplish today, because I feel like we're talking about specific things to change a page, but what we're really trying to do is rethink what it means to design a site. You're designing a customer experience that is focused on the mental sequence of thought with the micro yeses that lead to a macro yes. And the most essential compass in designing that is your value proposition. And once you get that piece right, if you keep in mind that you're not selling a website or you're not selling an offering, people have to buy you before they buy your product. And then when a website doesn't have a personality, when it doesn't speak, when it doesn't explain, it's pretty difficult for you to create relationship with that sort of personified site. And it's critical for you to think through the experience in such a way as to enable you to create genuine relationship with the people that are interacting around it. All right. I appreciate what you're all saying and the kind words here. Let me ask you this. As I wrap up here, can you give me some feedback? Has today been helpful for you? I've been concerned because it's at 2 levels of content. It's almost at the marketing leader level where you're thinking about the entire site design, and it's at the applied level where you're trying to get results. Tia, thank you for the kind words. And I'm watching your feedback as you come into the chat feature. I want to thank you for being with us today. We have a lot of resources connected to this that we'll put into the YouTube description when we post the video, where you can download some of the tools that we talked about. And we're grateful to have you in our